Imposter syndrome is a term that's thrown around a lot, and even more so with women than men. So, why is that? Women are prone to feeling like a fraud despite being extremely talented. And why do we fear being exposed despite having all the evidence that we built the career we have? In today's episode, we're going deep on this topic, giving you a new definition of imposter syndrome, how it presents in sneaky ways you might not even realize, and sharing 5 tactical strategies for getting rid of it so you can step into rooms with full confidence and leave imposter syndrome behind.
I'm so excited for this episode. A couple of weeks ago, I was having a conversation with a business coach of mine, and I was telling her, I was like, things are going really well, but why do I always have the feeling like the rug is going to be ripped out from underneath me? That is such a prevalent feeling. I have it all the time. And she was like, I literally never have that. She's like, I've never once felt that way. And I was like, what do you mean? What do you mean? I was like, I feel this way 24/7. And she was like, I built this. Like, I am where I am today because I built this. Why would I ever feel like the rug is about to be ripped out from underneath me? And she's like, and if it did, let's say all of your platforms disappear tomorrow. Let's say TikTok bans you and everything disappears. She was like, I built myself to get to where I am today. I would just rebuild it. I just have so much trust in myself that I am the type of person that built this thing in the past and I could do it again in the future. And I was like, that is such a good way to look at it. And I realized, researching for this episode that when it comes to imposter syndrome, it's actually not a confidence thing, it's an identity thing. So I'm excited to kind of chat through that and what that looks like for a lot of people.
Yeah, I feel like a lot of us have probably seen the video at this point because I think it's a couple years old where I believe her name is pronounced Ilona Maher. She's an Olympic athlete. She did an interview where the journalist said, how do you deal with imposter syndrome? And Ilona was like, I don't. And she goes, oh, so you just ignore it? And Ilona was like, no, I just don't have it. She was like, I have worked for what I have, so I just don't have imposter syndrome. And the journalist could not even conceptualize that. She was like, okay, so your advice to people is just to ignore it. And Alona was like, how else do I have to word it? But I think it's such an interesting conversation because we talk on this podcast a lot about, increasing your income, going after the job that you want, starting a business, doing all of these things. But there is this deeper emotional layer that comes with that of, okay, how do I deal with the imposter syndrome when I'm trying to put myself in rooms with people who are doing what I want to do and I don't feel like I belong there? Or maybe you accomplish something in your career or in your finances and it doesn't feel right. It's like, how do you actually get to that point? And I'm excited for this conversation because we're going to dive really deep into it. And I thought maybe I had, some confidence. I'm like, I could do with a little confidence, boost, whatever. But then when I was researching for this episode, I didn't identify as someone with imposter syndrome. I was like, no, I just get a little insecure from time to time. Oh, baby, do I have imposter syndrome? I was researching for this and for context of where we're headed with this episode, I was deep in the psychology of how it forms and all these things and whatever. And the root causes. And I was like, whoa, I definitely have imposter syndrome. And so I think even if you're listening to this and you're like, I don't know if I do.
Well, yeah, because it's not one thing. It's not like it doesn't show up the same for every single person. And in this episode, we're going to outline different ways that it shows up for different people. But when we were going through this outline, I was trying to find examples of different ways that I've had those feelings of imposter syndrome for each of these ways that it shows up. And I was like, wow, I relate to every single one of these, and not all the time. It's just in certain periods of my life or in certain situations, that feeling will come up in a different way. So it's not just like, oh, I feel like I'm an imposter because I work as a consultant and I don't feel like a consultant. It's not that black and white. You don't have to be an imposter about necessarily what you're talking about. You can know a lot about what you're talking about, but it's back to that identity piece of what makes you feel like you can, or qualified to do the thing that you're going to do.
And it manifests in so many ways, things that I do or that I notice other people do or that I think that I did not think were connected to imposter syndrome, but it is. So we'll get into it, but it's going to be fascinating. I'll tell you that. But just to kind of kind of kick things off with about like what even is imposter syndrome at a fundamental level. So this is a definition that I found from the National Library of Medicine, well, a study from the National Library of Medicine. And I think it's so interesting. It says, imposter syndrome is a scientifically recognized phenomenon primarily experienced by high functioning, high achieving people, where people cannot internalize their success and therefore experience feelings of self doubt, anxiety, depression, and a fear of being exposed as a fraud in their work despite verifiable and objective evidence of their success. I know that is such a mouthful, and we're going to break this down throughout this whole episode, like bar for bar. But when I read this definition, I was shocked because when I think of imposter syndrome, I think of, oh, I just don't feel like I belong. Like I'm in this room and maybe I was invited to be at this networking event or this content creator event or whatever it may be, this dinner, and I just don't feel like I belong. I feel like an imposter. But this definition is talking about high functioning, high achieving people, AKA like us and pretty much everyone that listens to this podcast, not being able to internalize our success. That is the root of it. That's the core issue is we cannot internalize our success. So therefore it leads to feelings of self-doubt, anxiety, depression. And then what got me was the fear of being exposed as a fraud in their work despite having evidence, because that is something I have experienced. And I'm like, am I okay? Like I thought something was wrong with me. I didn't think this was like something people experienced, but I would be afraid of people being like, I found out she never made that much money freelancing. I'm like, but I did, like, you know what I mean? It's just factual that I did. I have the books, I have all the invoices, like, so why do I fear that? And it's like, because I can't internalize that success. And that this definition just like shook me.
When they frame it as you can't internalize your success, that's what got me because again, I felt like I never really related to imposter syndrome because I always thought about it as like the fraud piece. And I never necessarily felt like a fraud in any type of way. But when you think of like, okay, you are where you are today because of what you've done, your successes, but you don't internalize them and it doesn't become a part of your identity. And when I was researching for this episode, I found out your brain tries to keep your identity consistent. So when you start to outgrow how you see yourself and your brain starts to outgrow that, it creates tension, which is called cognitive dissonance. And your brain tries to bring you back to that identity because your brain wants your identity to be consistent. So you got the thing, you got the new role, you got the promotion, you got a bunch of new followers, but your brain intentionally tries to downplay it because it wants your identity to be the identity of who you were before, because it's not safe for you to create an entire new identity. And I thought that that was so interesting. And I do think that like a lot of people listening to this can probably relate to that of like, you've had some type of success. Maybe you're not exactly where you want to be yet. I don't think any of us are, but you've definitely had some success and you don't internalize it. And then it portrays in so many different ways in your life.
Yes. And when you think about being a high achieving person, and I know we both do this to ourselves, is you constantly move the goalpost. So you are setting goals and then you're achieving them. And I think that's just also in some of our nature. We are the kind of people that we want to, like when we set a goal, we're like dead set on achieving it. So when you think about how you're constantly leveling up and achieving, doing all of these things, how much of a threat to your identity that becomes if you're not internalizing it. Because it's not just, oh, I worked really hard and I got this job. It's like, you're like, oh, I got this job. I hit this, fitness milestone I wanted to. I taught myself this new thing. I achieved this, I achieved that, whatever. Now there's so many achievements that are happening that your brain cannot internalize. And now it's like, what do you, of course it feels like a threat because your brain's job and your body's job is to keep you safe and to maintain homeostasis. So those things feel threatening to it. And I don't know, it's just such an interesting way to think about it.
Before we move on, I was listening to a podcast episode about a month ago, and the guest on the show was a psychologist. It was that M on the Brain girl.
Yes, she's so good.
Yeah, no, it was a really good episode. But one thing that she was talking about in this context, she was saying, like, with the identity piece, your identity moves a lot slower than your success often does. And she is obviously objectively so successful, has millions of followers, like knows so much, and so many people come to her as an authority figure, but she's trying to write her first book. And she was like, I realized that I didn't have the identity of an author. And
I
we've talked
listened to
about
this
this
one,
on the
yeah.
podcast before too, but like we're trying to grow the podcast right now. But do we identify as successful podcasters?
Mm-hmm.
When someone asks us what we do we say like, no, I'm a podcaster? We've been podcasting for 3 years. We absolutely
Mm-hmm.
should. But like
Yeah.
that identity moves so much slower than the success does or the action does. So it's not just like a fake it till you make it kind of thing. It's you really do need to think about like what is your identity. You're never going to be a successful author if you don't think about yourself as an author.
Yes. Once you were talking about that, you reminded me I listened to that episode when it came out because I love Emma on the Brain, her stuff. She's so smart and her stuff is so interesting to me as someone who just
Mm-hmm.
loves like psychology and the brain. It's an amazing episode and she definitely has good things to say about it. But I also think that especially for our podcast being like 99% of y'all that listen are women. This, we have a few men that listen. We love y'all. We welcome you here. But this is like largely a podcast for the girls. I think when we have this conversation about imposter syndrome as well, we'd be remiss to not talk about the fact that women experience imposter syndrome more than men. Like I have had conversations about this with my male friends and they're like, "No, I've never doubted my presence in the room or I've never doubted that I belong there." And it's like it's like why, like I want to be like that, I want to not experience that at all. And so we wanted to just kind of cover a couple of reasons why women experience imposter syndrome more, but studies actually show that women experience imposter syndrome more often and more intensely than men. So there are, for example, in the workplace, there are higher rates of fearing being exposed as a fraud in the workplace for women than for men. So then you think about the residual impacts of that too, the anxiety, the fear, the nervousness, all of those things. I also think a lot of it is about how we're socialized as women from a young age. And there's studies to back this up, saying that women are taught more often to be humble, modest, and less confident, while boys are pushed to lead. So women are also expected to be perfect caretakers and employees at the same time, and what that looks like. So then women don't feel oftentimes like they feel like an imposter. They deal with all these feelings of imposter syndrome, and they also don't internalize, for example, referencing the point about women being expected to be perfect caretakers and employees at the same time. Then we don't internalize the actual feat that it is to balance those two things at once as any sort of success, or we just say, well, that's just the norm, that's what is expected of me, so therefore that's not exceptional, and we don't internalize that as any sort of success, and then that creates the imposter syndrome from there.
This one really resonated with me. And obviously, no one likes a boastful
No.
person or someone who's like bragging about themselves all the time. But I also think that women downplay their success so
100%.
much and speak about things that they're doing as it's not a big deal because they have been conditioned to be so humble. And like, we love a humble girl.
Right.
But I think that that inherently makes you not internalize your success even more because, or internalize it even less because you're so used to just downplaying it. If someone's, asking you how work is going and you're like, oh, like it's good. Like
Mm-hmm.
I just quit my job and like I did make 6 figures in my freelance business this year, but like, oh, it's just good. And you kind of
I
talk about it like
know.
that. And they're like, whoa, whoa, wait, like what?
Yeah.
You did that, but you downplay it.
Mm-hmm.
And then I think internally you downplay it.
Yes, I know. I want to do a whole episode on this topic about how we speak about ourselves and how to speak about yourself in a more powerful and confident way, because I think it does directly impact the rooms that you get invited into and the quality of conversations you have with people, because it's like I've realized there are people who do the exact same thing. They had the exact same structure of freelance business. And I would say, yeah, I like freelance a little bit. And they would say, I run a solo marketing agency. Point blank, which one sounds more impressive? Which one sounds like a legit thing? The solo marketing agency. We do the exact same thing. It just comes down to how we talk about it, because I have imposter syndrome about it and that person doesn't. So I want to do a whole episode on that topic, but I think it really is so important. The other thing to point out here too, I mean, I think implicit biases and sexist stereotypes are obviously part of this as well. And we're not going to get like deep into the roots of those, but I think it's important to recognize. But over time, this leads women to feeling like they have to prove their competence more than men, just like that they're competent enough to be there, which this stat is just, I'm like, goodness gracious. Women wait until they meet 100% of job qualifications to apply, while men apply at 60%. That is crazy to me. I thought it would be a less drastic difference, but the
No,
fact that
that's
it's
insane.
that ratio is insane. But it just goes to show, how much imposter syndrome is not just impacting how you feel, giving you those emotions of anxiety, depression, the fear of being exposed as a fraud, but also how it's actually impacting your finances because maybe you're not going for the opportunity that you're fully qualified for and someone else is getting it because you're just simply having imposter syndrome about it. And so it's so much deeper than just not feeling like you belong in a space. It really impacts so much more of your life. And that's why we're having this conversation today. But now we're going to move into talking about how imposter syndrome presents. And this is so interesting to me. I mean, this whole topic is interesting to me. I'm passionate about this, as you can probably tell by my tone and excitement. But so, imposter syndrome typically comes up as a response to an achievement related task, which is interesting because I never thought of it that way until I was reading studies on imposter syndrome. But it presents as a response to an achievement related task. And we often respond to it in two ways. Number one is over preparation. So we feel like we have to work harder than others to achieve the same goal. And because of that, we must be an imposter. Or we procrastinate. So we feel that we're an imposter because of a hurried last minute preparation that will eventually expose us as a fraud. So to give a couple just like examples, like fake, examples here. Over preparation. It's like someone asks me to come on a podcast or something. And I feel like I have to, because I don't feel that I belong on that podcast. I now push myself to over prepare, even though it could be on topics I'm fully comfortable about. I push myself to over prepare because I don't feel good enough. Now I'm adding the stress on top of myself. I'm anxious going on there. I don't feel like I belong. That's an example of that. Procrastination, let's say, same thing. I'm invited on this podcast and I don't feel like I belong there. I'm like, why would I be invited on this podcast? And now I'm preparing for it in a hurried fashion. And then I think, oh my gosh, yeah, I definitely just don't belong there because someone who actually belongs there would never be preparing for it in this way. And I think that's just like, it's interesting to think about, okay, the achievement related task is the trigger and then how we respond to it.
And I think inaction is the third one that could show up for a lot of people. And I know this would show up for me as well, kind of what you were just talking about, women waiting until they meet 100% of the job qualifications to apply. I think that imposter syndrome flat out just makes women not take any action at all. I know in the social media space, we hear that all the time. It's like, well, I couldn't possibly start creating content on that topic because I don't know 100% of the things about that topic.
Yeah.
I started posting about money with a negative net worth.
Yep.
Okay. I was 22 years older. I would get comments all the time being like, what is this girl with a negative net worth doing talking about personal finance online? But like, that's not the point. You do have to still take the action. And obviously there is a portion of this that's just like acting even though you have imposter syndrome and just doing the dang thing. But I do think that that is often what ends up happening is women just don't do anything because they feel like an imposter. So they're like, I'm not going to even apply for the job, or I'm not going to start posting on social media. I'm not going to go after what I actually want until I feel like I belong or until I have that identity.
And I think we talk about it in relation to confidence, that confidence comes from doing. And we'll talk about strategies of like how to get through imposter syndrome and all of that. But I think part of it is being like, I'm going to show up despite the imposter syndrome that I feel. And I think that helps you realize like, oh no, I do belong in these rooms. Like I am qualified. And we'll talk too about how to internalize success and all of that. But I think the thing that's interesting about how imposter syndrome presents, when you think about that, right? You complete this achievement related task. And then we very briefly feel successful, but then we don't internalize that success. And the cycle then repeats. We go to do another achievement related task or we achieve something. And then all of a sudden we don't internalize it and we feel the exact same way. So it's this cycle over and over and over. And the difference is being able to internalize that success. That's the core thing. And I know we both get stuck in that cycle over and over and over again.
1000%. We talk, Grace and I have this conversation off the record on the podcast all the time. Like when we log on to film an episode and we just are yapping for an hour, that's like the core of what we're yapping about is, yeah, you have a video that goes super viral and you gain 100,000 followers. Okay, but you don't internalize that success. So you still feel like you have 1,000 followers. I think that that's like that feeling of the rug about to be ripped out from underneath you that I was talking about at the beginning of this episode. That's exactly where that comes from because you haven't internalized the success that you've seen. So you just feel like it feels so unsteady. It never feels like a grounded presence of like, yes, I am a full-time content creator that has hundreds of thousands of followers. Like, do I feel that way? Do I feel like someone who has influence over the people that follow me, or no?
Hmm.
Because that identity piece is what, if you don't have it, it's never going to feel steady.
Yeah. I recently got, I'm transitioning to a new management team, and I was telling Erin, I was on a call with my manager yesterday, my new manager, and she was talking to me about something. I don't remember what it was. And I said to her, I said, I need to really treat it like this is my full-time job. I said, because I still view myself as a content creator with 10,000 followers. And that's no, like, no tea, no shade to people with
Mm-hmm.
10K followers, but I don't view it as like as serious or impressive or legitimate. I don't view it as any of that. And what's interesting is I was at an event the other weekend, and I was volunteering, and there was a girl running a booth there. And she was like, oh my gosh, I mentioned it was a organization that works with people who are experiencing or getting out of sex trafficking. And so she was mentioning there are women at the shelters and are like housing they have. And I was like, oh, I'd love to. I have a bunch of PR like products. I'm like, I would love to bring some of the makeup products for them or whatever, donate to you guys. So we're having this conversation, and then we start talking about what I do for a living. She's like, oh my gosh, I'd love to follow you. I'm like, yeah, let's follow each other so we can like be in touch. We'll chat later. She goes to follow me, and she goes, oh my gosh. She goes, you have 100,000 followers. She goes, so you're like famous. And I was like, no, like I was like, I'm not famous at all. But it's like in my head, unless I have a million followers, I have like it's not that
And
serious.
even if you had a million followers, you
I
wouldn't feel
probably
any
wouldn't,
different. And that
because
is
then I
the
would be like, I don't have 2 million.
1000%. The
Because the
numbers
bar
are not the thing.
yes, the
Yep.
bar keeps moving. And it's funny because people externally, like I've had people be like, Grace, you literally started a freelance marketing business with no marketing experience. You scaled it to six figures. Then you built another six-figure business with content creation. You've been podcasting for 3 years. You have thousands of people who listen to the podcast every week. And I'm like, yeah, but I'm like, the thing is, and they're like, zip it. They're like, and it's like, why do I not look at it as, I've done all of those things. To me, I'm like, well, I could have built my freelance marketing company to multiple, the hundreds and hundreds and hundreds. I could have built it to a million. I'm not where I want to be in terms of, the size of my pages or how much I'm earning. And we want the podcast to be further along. And it's like, at what point do you release yourself from the shackles of constantly moving the bar and internalize the success that you've already experienced and like bask in it? Allow yourself to just bask in it and be confident in it. Like, at what point do you let it go, you know?
Absolutely. And I think that one thing that we tend to do as well is we're not internalizing our success, but we are internalizing our shortcomings. So
Yes.
whether that's, you're a content creator and one video per month goes viral, but the other 29 like don't really perform, or you have some videos that absolutely tank. You're not going to internalize that viral video, but you are sure going to internalize
Mm-hmm.
that video that has 1,200 views on TikTok. Like
Yes.
you internalize it. I follow this content creator coach on Instagram, and he posted a video a couple of weeks ago that said, I forget what NBA player he was talking about, but he was like, whenever he misses a shot, he said he doesn't say I missed the shot. He says that shot didn't go in. He doesn't internalize the
Mm.
miss as a fault on him or like a shortcoming. He just he just views it as like, okay, well, I put up 50 shots, like obviously one didn't go in, or
Right.
obviously X amount of them didn't go in, and you just view it as like that's part of it. That's like a data point in the total shots that you took in the game. That's a data point in how many videos you posted in a month. That's fine. Whenever you post a video and it has 1,200 views, it's like, okay, like that's feedback. That's a different way that I can market it next time, or different verbiage that I can use. You just view it as a data point and an experiment, not as something that you internalize. But I do think that we do that a lot. We don't internalize our success, but we do internalize our shortcomings.
100%. Because I mean, I didn't internalize, I feel like we've talked about it so much, but it was just genuinely one of the most like fun things I've ever produced. But the style series on my page, I did not internalize the success of that series. Mind you, it got like 12 million views on Instagram in 30 days. Like, it was insane. I've never put anything out that performed as well as this has. And it was so much fun. I didn't internalize the success of it until I was about halfway through, and the videos were going like viral every single time. And I was like, wow, like I'm onto something here. Like, people love this, you know? Like, it took so long. And even then I'm like, okay, well then what's the next one? What's the next one going to be? And I don't think of it as like this, like, I think of it as successful, and I think of it as wildly successful in comparison to the other things I've done, but I don't think it makes me a wildly successful content creator. And that's such a terrible trap to end up in, but I think we all are so prone to it as like the high achieving women that want to accomplish a lot. It's like that bar is always moving, and therefore we don't take the time to internalize any time we do meet a bar that we've set, and then we're on to the next one. So we're going to transition to talking a little bit about why we fail to internalize success, and then we'll talk about how to actually stop the cycle of imposter syndrome. But we kind of just want to give you these reasons as to why we fail to internalize success to kind of just like chew on and just think about like after this episode as well, because there are a decent number. There's 5 reasons, and some might pertain to you, some might not, but definitely take the time to think about where it might show up for you. And I want to preface too that these come from a study on imposter syndrome, like that psychologists ran deeply. So there's a lot of validity in these things, and it's something that I've been thinking about a lot. But number one is perfectionism, which this is interesting. In this study, it did not say perfectionism as to have everything be perfect. It framed perfectionism as the need to be the best. And I had to sit there and be like, wait a damn minute. I was
I
like,
like
wait a
that.
damn minute. I was
Yep.
like, the need to be the best. And it said, you create a self-imposed, unattainable standard, and you have hyper-competitive goals. I said, hold on a second. I said, wait a damn minute. Wait a damn minute. Okay. It literally clocked me because I view perfectionism as this desire to just do things really well. I'm like, no, I just really want to do things really, really well. I care so much. No, you don't. It's like, what's the root behind why you want to do
Yeah, you
everything
want to be
so
the
well? It's because you
best.
want to be the best.
Yeah.
And what's interesting is that people often describe perfectionism as it manifests as, oh, you're setting impossible goals. And I'm always like, well, no, I don't set impossible goals because I don't really like believe in impossible. I think with the right strategy and some determination and consistency, I can make things happen. However, my goals are a little hyper competitive. And when you frame it that way, and it's not the sense that I want to like outperform everybody else, like I want to beat this person and knock this person down. Like it's not that. It's just that I want to outperform exceptional. I want to be beyond exceptional. Like I don't want to just be a successful content creator. I want to be an exceptional content creator that people think of as, oh my gosh, Grace's content provides so much value. Like her editing is amazing, her filming is amazing, the way she articulates herself is amazing. Like it's not, for me in my head, the goal is not to be good enough. The goal is to be exceptional. But it's like, why is that though?
Well,
What's the point?
and I think when we're talking about like setting these high standards for ourselves, it's okay to say, like, I want to be an exceptional content creator, and that's okay. But
Mhm.
when it's the need to be the best, that means that you're comparing yourself to someone else. You
Mhm.
can't be the best unless there's like a a line there
Yeah.
of like, what is everybody else doing, right? And I think that that's when it becomes a trap. And when you stop internalizing your success, is like there's always going to be someone bigger and better than you. There's always going to be someone who's making more money, who got the promotion before you, who gain the followers before you do, who have millions of followers already. There's going to be that acquired style girl that's like going on a private jet for her bachelorette. It's like when you're viewing it as not just like I want to do the best I can do, but like how do I be better than other people? I think that that's when it becomes a trap.
100%. Because you think about, for example, let's say you're invited to speak to a group of people on a topic you're really knowledgeable about and you're feeling imposter syndrome. Why is that? Is it because you don't feel like you are the best, you are the most knowledgeable at that topic? Who cares? Who cares? There are so many people who have knowledge on that topic, but it's like you don't feel like you belong there because you're not the best at it. And that was such an interesting way to frame perfectionism. The second one on this list, it's very self-explanatory, so we'll keep this one short, but it's called superheroism. And basically, this term also is used in other psychological studies to mean other things as well. So just to give that context, but in this context, these psychologists were saying that it is the tendency to over prepare for tasks to appear more capable of completing them. And I thought that was fascinating too, because like I don't know, the idea of over preparing for something to then look more capable of completing it.
Yeah, like
I
you're
was
already
yeah,
capable.
I was like, wait a second. Because then I think about certain things that I do over prepare for, or I run through the notes like a million times, or, I was just on a podcast a couple days ago and I'm looking at the questions multiple times over, and there are questions about like, what do you think about the state of freelancing in the world right now? Like, that's the easiest question for me to answer. I know it like the back of my hand. Why am I over preparing for this? And does over preparing actually even make me feel more prepared or more equipped to have the conversation or to be where I am? Usually, no, like
Right.
it doesn't. Um, the third one on this list is fear of failure. And there's actually a real medical term for this, which I'm going to butcher how you say this. It's like achophobia, it's something.
Look it
Okay,
up.
look it up. Google it, guys. Google it. Okay. But it's actually a medical term, which I thought was interesting. That it is like
Yeah.
a real deeper thing. But you tend to experience anxiety, fear of being shamed or humiliated if you fail or do worse than a particular peer on a task, and then you end up being exposed as an imposter if you fail. Which this was interesting because, like I said at the beginning, I thought this feeling of being exposed as a fraud was I'm like, I must be unwell. Like I'm like, I need to, and I talked to my therapist about it, and she'll say things like, well, like I'll be like, well, what if they say that I'm like lying about my freelancing income? She's like, well, are you lying? I'm like,
Right.
no. I'm like, no, I'm not lying at all. In fact, I'm like, it's when I share my financial stuff, it's often down to the cents. Like I'll be like,
Mhm.
and 20 cents at the end of my numbers because I'm like, it is accurate. I'm not making any of this up. And it's interesting though, because again, I thought this was just a me problem, which there's 7 billion people on this planet, right?
It's
Like
never just a me problem.
it's never just a you problem. There's too many people to have a unique experience. But people often feel that. They feel like they're going to be exposed as a fraud or an imposter if they fail. And so they so desperately don't want to fail. So then that imposter syndrome comes up because they're like, I don't belong here and I'm going to fail and then I'm going to be exposed as a fraud. And it's going to be like, again, using the example of getting invited to speak to a group, it's like you experience the imposter syndrome. Your fear in relation to failure is I might not live up to their expectations, or maybe I don't do as well as my peer who maybe knows more about this topic than I do. And then I'm going to be exposed as a fraud and they're going to say, oh my gosh, yeah, she has no idea what she's talking about.
I also think this one, how this could manifest for you could be, because I know this shows up for me as well, is you kind of like muddle yourself down a little
Yes.
bit and don't talk authentically. You don't share your thoughts and
Mhm.
opinions as much. You maybe don't speak up in work meetings. You don't, if you do get invited on a podcast, you're like, yeah, you're just holding back a little bit because I think that naturally, the more authentic you show up, the more you expose about yourself, the more thoughts and opinions you share, you do open yourself up to that fear of failure or fear of
Mhm.
like not being accepted. Or when you do share your opinion and you're like, well, what if they say that that opinion's not right? And then
Yeah.
now they think that I'm a fraud because
Mhm.
I talk about money, but I have this opinion about like
Mhm.
X, Y, and Z. So I think that that's how that could show up as well.
Yeah, and I'm glad that you said that because that is something that we've talked about it off camera. Even on the podcast, I will say before, like, I'll preface things by saying, in my opinion, or like, well, this is just my perspective. Like, it's like, no, duh, girl. Like, you're the one
Obviously.
saying it. So obviously it's your perspective. But why do I say that? Because there's a part of me somewhere inside that fears that I'm going to be incorrect or that I have to be the most knowledgeable on a topic in order to talk about it or to express my opinion on it. And I do think it's interesting when you think about it that way too.
Hmm.
Number four is denial of competence and capability. And I think this is honestly one of,
Yeah,
these
that's
are
the
all
biggest
prevalent, but this
one.
is one of the most prevalent. But we tend to discount our intelligence, experience, skills, and natural talents. We have a propensity to internalize failure and relate success to external influence or a random chance, despite evidence that you accomplished something without those factors. Which is so interesting because this one, I mean, this research study, it was I should Venmo them some money and be like, thank you so much. Let me support your research because you clocked me into actual oblivion. Like I've been reflecting on my whole existence the last week after
Let me
preparing
Venmo
this
them.
outline because I'm like, I think about this and when I talk about my success sometimes, when I talk about my freelance business especially, I would always say, well, I got to live at my parents' house rent free. And, that obviously allowed me to have less pressure on my shoulders because I didn't have as many expenses. And so I had more, flexibility to be able to start my business and take more risks and whatever. And I will say that. And there's a fine line because I always want to acknowledge my privilege in the situation. Like, of course, it's a privilege to live at home rent free. And I'm not going to sit here and be like, well, just go live at your parents' house if you want to save money and start a business, because that's not a privilege everyone has. So I am acutely aware of that. However, I will simplify my success down to, well, I got to live at home at my parents' house rent free. However, and I wrote this down because I was like, I need to read this word for word, as I'm not gonna say it. I'm like, and I worked 70 hours a week for months on end to build my business, and I taught myself everything that I know, and I networked like crazy in the beginning, and that's how I built my business. Like, it's not that, oh, I got to live at my parents' house rent free, so I was handed this business. No, I busted my freaking tail, and I was like hardly sleeping and working all these hours. It's like one aspect of support that you had, or one element that might have made your success slightly easier, doesn't discount all of the work that's gone into it. Like, because you got a job because your friend referred you or someone gave you a recommendation, that doesn't mean you didn't deserve the job. Like, it you still had to do all the things to get the job.
Yep, and I think that this one is especially where the I don't feel confident enough to talk
Yes.
about that yet really shows up. And obviously we do social media. That's the lens in which we're talking about it in, but I think so many people listening to this podcast are interested in social media too. You guys tell us that all the time in Spotify. You love when we talk about building your personal brands and showing up online and building a business through social media. And that is what so many people listening to this podcast are thinking and telling themselves is like, well, there's topics that I'm interested in, but I don't know enough to talk about it yet. It's like, again, I started talking about money when I had a negative net worth. I didn't know everything there was to know about the topic of money, but I was a few steps ahead of the person that I was trying to talk to. When I'm 22, I'm talking to the 19-year-old me who was just learning this stuff for the first time. And what did she need to hear? I was a couple steps ahead of that girl so I could talk to that girl. But I think so often, yeah, we like deny our competence and say, well, I don't know enough about anything to be able to show up online and talk about
Yes.
it. That's not true.
It's so harmful in so many ways to ourselves. And this is the one thing I've been thinking about so much since I was working on this outline, that how many times do we block our own opportunities or our own blessings because we deny our competence in something? Where we, again, going back to the job application thing, we don't apply because we don't think we know enough, or we see an opportunity to do a speaking engagement, a podcast interview, to go to a dinner for entrepreneurs, and we say, well, no, I don't know enough about that to be in that room. And what's interesting is, when you allow yourself to be numb to your knowledge, you block your own opportunities. But then you think about the people that are in those spaces and are the ones that are confident. Like, again, don't be boastful, but there are people who own their knowledge, and you think about where they end up in the rooms that they're in and the opportunities that they get. And that's something that I've started to become acutely aware of as I've grown as a content creator, because I see other creators that I feel like have just as much knowledge as I do, and they're being invited to be on this panel and speak to this company about their marketing strategy and all these things, and I'm like, gosh dang, I'm like, how they and I'm like,
How
but
did
you
they
know
do
what,
that?
I'm like,
Yep.
they're also speaking with conviction. And what's so funny too is, you'll see people speak with such conviction about something that I think is very basic, right? They'll be like, you should always trim out when there's pauses in your content. And in my head, I'm like, well, duh. But then the thing is, they're speaking about it with such conviction that, because they know that that is not obvious to everyone. They remember the wealth of knowledge they have, and that's part of it. And that advice and that knowledge is only going to be basic to people that are further along than them, but they're not talking to those people. So
Yep.
then I'm like, oh my goodness gracious. I'm like, Grace, the things that you could speak on or talk about, if you actually owned your competence and what you know, would be insane. But I don't. And it's like, ugh.
Yep. The last thing that I'll say about this one, since we're having this conversation, is why do we put people on pedestals? And I think that the further along that we get and the more successful people we are exposed to, I've learned that I've spent way too much of my life putting people on pedestals. Like, you do learn when you are in close proximity to successful people that they are so normal.
Yes.
Like, they're just simply such a normal human. And you're like, what the heck? Like, we have friends that have multi-million-dollar companies. They like invest in a bunch of companies, and they are so normal.
They shop at Kohl's.
They shop at
Yes.
Kohl's. They're still
They
going
love
to
an Old
all
Navy
these
sale. Yeah.
They are so normal, but you put people on these pedestals and you're like, well, they could do it, but that absolutely could not be me.
Yes.
But it can be you, girl. Like,
Yes.
it can be
And
you.
we also tend to assume that people in those positions where maybe they have more followers or they are doing speaking engagements or they're doing, all these things, or even if you work a corporate job, people at your company that are in manager positions or higher ups, we tend to assume because of the way we perceive them talking or speaking from that position of power that they have way more competence than we do. But like if we were to actually do a dang pop quiz on some of the topics that are being discussed, you would find that you might have a lot more knowledge than those people. It's just that they're just owning what they know and they're not afraid of what they don't know. And I think that's just so interesting because sometimes, if you've ever gone to a speaking engagement or something and you hear someone talk about it and you're like, I I could have been on that panel.
Mm-hmm.
I would have said the same things. I could have answered those questions just as well as anybody else there. And you start to realize, dang, I put that person on a pedestal because they have more followers or they are doing more public speaking than I am. And so then I thought I'm disqualified when in reality you would have done the same thing. So something to chew on and think about
Yes.
after this episode. But the last one on this list of why we fail to internalize success is actually a fear of success. And there is a medical term for this as well. And I'm going to butcher the pronunciation of it as well because these are just way too long of words. But it's like achievemophobia, which is so
That was
interesting.
easier than the last one.
The last one was just ridiculous. But basically, we internalize failures as a positive feedback loop. And so we have difficulty in recognizing success as an actual positive thing. So it leads to higher expectations or an increase in your workload. And this keeps you feeling safe because you have some sort of belief deep down about what success might bring. And this is interesting because a few years ago, I did this exercise that basically you would write out what you want to accomplish, where you want to go, the success that you want. And then you would write down any reasons that you think you can't have it. And when you would write down any reasons you think you can't have it, or why it would be negative to you, you would end up finding these like, you'd kind of end up asking yourself, like, why, like over and over. And you would realize in your head, in your subconscious, you were perceiving that if you become more successful, your friends will treat you differently, or your family will take advantage of you, or people will view you as greedy because you became wealthier. And sometimes we don't even realize we have those things operating in the back of our heads, but they're there. And so then that creates this subconscious fear of success to where when we fail, we view that as positive, and when we succeed, we view it as negative. And it's something that I think you have to bring to your conscious mind and really think about because you might not be like, oh yeah, I really view success as bad. But when you actually think about how it plays out in your life, you might.
Absolutely. I think one big one for obviously we talk a lot about money on this podcast and like the kind of the example of like, well, who am I to make more money than the
Mm-hmm.
people around me? And just like feeling that pressure of like, well, everyone around me is at this income level. And like, who am I to think
Right.
that I could like double that or triple that or like be in a different position than what my parents were growing up? I think that that's a big one as well.
Absolutely. So, in this section, just because that was a lot of information, I want to sum it up. We don't internalize success as success because it's either one, not perfect enough for us to consider it a success, two, not considered successful because we had to over prepare for it, three, are so focused on how we could fail, we didn't focus on the success. Four, we deny our own competence and capabilities. And five, we actually fear success. So then we want to wrap this episode up by talking about how to actually stop the cycle of imposter syndrome. And with this, I want to preface too that this is an ongoing thing. It's not like you
Yeah, you have it
just,
or you don't.
yes. And I think
Yes.
sometimes these conversations around imposter syndrome, people are like, well, just don't have it. Just recognize that you are really successful and you've achieved a lot. And it's like, okay, great. But how do I actually do that? How do I actually internalize and recognize the success that I have? Because just telling me to do that is not enough. It's not helpful.
Mhm.
So the first one is with perfectionism, kind of again going through like why it happens, why we don't internalize it, and how to address them. So how do you actually address perfectionism? And this came from again from a whole guide from us that a psychologist wrote. So number one is to identify the beliefs and rules that drive your perfectionism and where it comes from. So when you think about that desire to be the best, why is that? What is the root of that? Is it that growing up there was maybe you didn't have maybe your parents weren't as happy for you or excited unless you were achieving something? Is it that if you came home with anything less than an A on your papers, that there was like, what are we doing? Are we slacking? You know, is it that you feel like you need to be the best? Were you always in competitive sports growing up where it was like, if I'm not the best, like if I don't place, number one, I've lost. Like, what are the roots of that and really understand where it comes from? Also, rejection is a big one. Like, it's not always that you would fail, but how did it feel when you didn't win or when you didn't meet the mark? Did you feel rejected? Were you in group settings, for example, I played softball growing up. If I went up and I struck out, how did it feel when I went back in the dugout? Was I around kids who were like, it's okay, don't worry about it, or was it dead silent, or was it a
Hmm.
silent car ride home? Like, what does that look like? And really get to the root of that. More often than not, these kind of core beliefs were formed in childhood before the age of 7. That's when a lot of our core beliefs are formed, is by the age of 7. And then core values actually get solidified between ages 13 and 18. So when you're thinking about the root, I think people often have a guilt around it, or they're like, well, I love my parents, so I don't want to think about maybe how my upbringing might have changed, created this for me. But it's before the age of 7. You weren't, I don't remember anything by, before the age of 7, really. I wasn't
Hmm.
very conscious. So you don't have to have guilt around it. Just know that, like, they're probably little things that kind of have compounded.
And I also think too with the perfectionism one, back to the I think this is the one that's the most prevalent where it's like men versus women.
Mm,
And if we think about what we were exposed to before the age of 7, think about how your mom talks about things. I know
yes.
my mom, like I absolutely love my mom to death, and she does that. Like
Hmm.
she downplays things. She'll like, yeah, not really talk about herself in like the most positive
Yes.
way a lot of times, and I think that that just like kind of perpetuates the cycle of women being more humble than men and like not being able to talk about it.
100%. And those are things you might, when you're like 3 years old, you don't pick up on them consciously, but your brain does store them the way that people are speaking about those kinds of things. So definitely go back and think about those too. With number two being the super heroism and over preparation for things. Affirmations are going to be huge here because you have to challenge your internal script. So instead of I need to prepare so they don't find out I'm a fraud, you have to consciously replace that thought with it's okay if I don't know everything. And I will say, is about 3 years ago at this point, maybe even 4, that my therapist, we started working together. And I was struggling a lot at the time with like body image and lack of self confidence and all these things. I was a mess. And she was like, I want you to practice affirmations. And my therapist Jen, she is my girl now, so we have really good rapport. But I remember being like, "Are you serious? Be serious. And I'm not doing so stupid stinking affirmations. I'm not standing there in front of my mirror being like, you are beautiful." I thought it was stupid. I really did. But me being me, I was like, let me look into the like psychology behind it and see what the benefit actually is. They are wildly, wildly effective because your beliefs, the negative beliefs in your head, are formed through repetition. By repeating them over and over and over again, that's how they get solidified in your mind. So the way to reverse them or kind of like undo them and change that script is by saying the opposite of that negative belief over and over and over and over again. So you have to consciously speak to yourself in a different way in order to reverse that. And I think when you understand that, it starts to make more sense as to why you should do affirmations. But I can also attest to having done them now every single day for 3 years. I have not missed a day. It has changed my life. The things that I used to do affirmations on years ago are not even issues. There are new issues that come up, and I continue to practice affirmations on them. But I don't, the things I struggled with, like literally been able to rewire certain beliefs just simply by doing
Yeah,
affirmations.
and I think back to the what we were talking about at the beginning of this episode, how your identity moves slower than your successes. And if your identity hasn't caught up yet, like the girl that is writing a book but she doesn't see herself as an author, like, okay, that's an identity issue. You're
Mm-hmm.
like you yes, you don't have the confidence in it, but you also don't have the identity, and affirmations are definitely going to help that identity piece catch up.
100%.
So I do them all the time too, and I love them, and I think that they've changed my life as well. The next one on the fear of failure piece, exposure therapy. I'm obsessed with this idea. There's so many people talking about like exposure therapy or rejection therapy
Mhm.
online, but it really is so true. this kind of does sound a little bit just like doing the dang thing, but like it is true. You need to get out there. You need to get exposed to not always winning and failing sometimes and posting 30 videos in a month and only one of them actually performing well. Like you have to do that because it's a feedback loop. Every single time you do something and get exposed to something else, and maybe it succeeds, maybe it fails. When if you apply to 30 jobs, you're not going to get a call back on all 30 jobs, but you have to get exposed to that in order to make it part of your everyday life and yeah, just get okay and comfortable with the quote unquote failure.
Yeah. And I mean, as adults, when was the last time you tried something for the first time? When was the last time you did something that you knew you were going to be bad at or you knew you were going to fail at? Because
Mm-hmm.
as kids, I think we tried those things all the time. We'd be on the playground trying some new, parkour off the equipment
Or
or
sports, your
whatever,
parents throw you
sports.
into
We
every single
always
sport, you
did
have
that.
no idea what you're doing.
Yes, we always were doing like different arts and crafts, trying new things for the first time all the time. And I think we get to a point in adulthood where we don't do that. So our comfortability with failure changes because we're just not exposing ourselves to it. So it doesn't have to be that you like, go speak in front of a crowd of 10,000 people and fail miserably. It's just go try a new workout class that you're not comfortable with, or go do a pottery class. Pottery will humble you because it's a lot harder than it looks, like try things that you're not going to be perfect at, and that will condition you to get more comfortable with it. For denial of competence and capability, this is such a hard one to shift, and I need to definitely work on this one, but you really have to ask yourself why you believe other people can do it and you can't. Like, why is your intelligence and skill set not enough, but theirs is? I can assure you there's always going to be someone who is smarter than you. There's always going to be someone who's less smart than you. There's always going to be someone who has more talent than you, someone who's less talented. There's just way too many people on this planet for you to genuinely be the most intelligent, like, person ever. Just point blank. I'm never going to be the best content creator on the planet. There's way too many people out there that are that. And that's okay. Affirmations also will be helpful here. And the other tip that I'll give in relation to this is making what I call a smile file. I did not come up with the idea of this. I don't know who did. I saw it online one time and I was like, have to do that. Basically, it's like it can be in your, somewhere on your phone. I keep mine in Notion, whatever. Anytime you get positive feedback or you accomplish something, you take a screenshot of it and you put it in the smile file. So when I was struggling a lot with my competence around freelancing, anytime I would have like really good metrics on something, or I would get positive feedback from a client saying, we loved this, it did so well, it brought in so many customers for us, whatever, I would take a screenshot of it and I'd put it in my smile file. So that then when I'm feeling like, okay, I'm not competent in this, I'm like, no, no, actually, we have pages of records on this. Because sometimes I think we actually forget, we just simply forget the feedback that we've gotten in the past or the achievements that we have had. And it's not that maybe we don't want to internalize them. We just forgot. I'm like, oh my gosh, wait, I forgot that he said that. You know what? That felt really good. And then it reminds me, okay, I actually do have a track record of this. And it kind of helps you recenter on what the reality of your competence actually
Yeah, you're
is.
collecting proof. And I think when it comes to denying your competence and your capability, I think that you need to really get to the root of what trait you actually think you're not competent or
Mm-hmm.
capable in. I know for me, one thing that shows up for me a lot in the social media space is feeling like I'm just like not creative,
Mm,
or I'm not like, how some people just show up like very well on camera, like
yeah.
showing their personality shines through. I always feel like mine doesn't. Like, it's not like I was like a theater kid. You know
Yeah.
what I mean? Like how people can
Yeah.
just really have like a big personality. And I like those are the two that show up for me. Is like, well, I'm not a creative person, or like I'm not like I don't even know what term to use for that, but like I'm not someone who can like show up authentically when I prop the camera up.
Mm.
So it's like you really have to get to the root cause of like what are those capabilities, those core capabilities that you actually think that you're not good at or you're not competent in, because for a lot of people, like maybe you don't resonate with the like, well, I'm not smart enough or
Mhm.
I don't know enough about the topic. Like, I know that I know a good amount about money, right? It's not that, but it's like you still might struggle showing up and like speaking about the thing that you know enough about, because there's these other core traits that you need in order to message them properly and reach the right audience and all of those things. You have to get to the root of it.
100%. The other thing too on this section of how to kind of stop yourself from denying your competence and capability is to practice accepting praise and compliments instead of rejecting or downplaying the compliments. And this is such a hard one. And I like a perfect example is people being like, you know, oh my gosh, you did such a good job on this project. And you immediately go, no, it was the team. Like everyone put in a lot of effort. It wasn't just me, da da da. Or like, oh no, like, but so and so helped me prepare so much. It's like, the most respectful way, shut up. Shut up
Yeah.
and say, thank you.
Thank you. I actually
Yes.
am so happy with that
Yes.
result. Like I tried so hard, or like
Yes.
I put a lot of effort into that. Thank you.
Yes. Thank you. Period. End of sentence. And I'm telling myself to shut up. I'm not saying shut up to I need
I'm the same
I'm
way.
pointing one finger at everyone listening and there are three pointing back at me, okay? Because I do that all the time where I'm like,
Hmm.
well, no, like, my management helped me get that opportunity or this that oh my gosh, it's like Grace is just
Just
accept the
stop.
compliment. Just say, "Thank you so much." And leave it there because and it's going to feel very uncomfortable, but over time it gets easier and that literally helps with cementing that kind of success or achievement in your brain and actually
I do
internalizing
this
it.
all the time, Alex, and love him. He's such a king. He'll be like, he says this to me all the time. He's like, you're one of like the hardest workers that I know, or like you work so hard. You like, he just always gives me those confident or compliments about my effort. And I always have some stupid response like, well, no, like I literally just sit at home all day and like make a couple TikTok, like, you know what I mean? But he sees me. We live together.
Yeah.
He sees how much I'm at my computer. He sees me when he texts me when he's on a work trip and it's a Saturday and he's like, what are you doing? And I'm like, literally working. Like, what do you mean?
We were sitting on my balcony last night eating dinner and Erin goes, "Well, like because like I don't really have a job." And I go, "Erin, I was like, hold on, and like back it up. I'm like, you actually have a whole company that you've built that you run full time that
Yeah,
makes
like I
you
have
a very
employees. We
good,
have
yeah,
employees.
yeah. I'm like,
Like,
we've got people underneath us, baby. I'm like, you have. I mean, you're very much employed, but it's like we all do it though, and it's like we reject those compliments because again that feels safer or it takes the attention off of us and I think the more we practice just saying thank you the better
thanks.
off we will be.
Yeah.
The last one on this list, though, is with the fear of success. How do you actually, get over that one? It's just journal about what you think success actually looks like and what do you think you gain and lose with success. And that goes back to what I was talking about before. And I when I say journal, I genuinely mean journal. Like
Journal.
give yourself the time to write about it. It was one of the most impactful exercises I have done is journaling about what success looks like to me and what I think I gain and lose because there are things that you will gain and lose by achieving certain things in life, but you need to assess like what those actually are because if you have a fear that the more success you gain, the less your family's going to accept you, or your friends are going to take advantage of you, or yeah, people are going to view you as greedy, or you're going to become out of touch, you're going to lose yourself. Then, of course, even if it's a subconscious belief, when you're achieving something, your brain is going to be like, oh my gosh, danger, danger, because that subconscious belief is existing in your brain and you need to bring that belief to the surface. So then you say, okay, I have a belief, a limiting belief that if I get more successful, I'm going to lose myself. Okay, now I'm going to do affirmations to work on rewiring that belief to believe that I know who I am at my core and I'm not going to lose myself no matter how much success I achieve. But you have to figure out what that root belief is that's making you afraid of success.
I totally agree. And honestly, just journaling about what you want your life to look like and allowing yourself to dream big in those successes
Mhm.
is so important. Like taking the gaining and the losing out of it. Like literally just journal about what you actually want your life to look like. Dream big. Like if you achieved everything that you want out of life, what would that actually look like? Because I think a lot of times we think about like at a high level, okay, well, what does success look like? But then we immediately put constraints on it to say like, okay, well, I actually don't think that I could achieve like all of the success I want. So like within these constraints of what I think I'm actually capable of, like what would success look like? Like we do that with the podcast all the time. It's like, okay, well, what would success look like? Well, what if we like had 4 times the amount of listens and we were like making some money off of like brand partnerships and stuff? No, what would actual success look like in the grand scheme of things? This podcast would be freaking huge. We would have millions and millions and millions of downloads. We would be doing in-person events. We would be doing speaking engagements. We would write a book. Like that's what success actually looks like. But I think we dim it and put constraints on it in a way that, yeah, makes us afraid of being
blocks our own
right.
dang
Yeah,
blessings. I
yeah.
know. I think like just to kind of conclude with this, like imposter syndrome is so much deeper than just feeling like you don't deserve to be where you are in life or that you aren't as successful as everyone else. And hopefully this episode helped you go a little bit deeper with yourself and gave you some tactical strategies as well to implement going forward. So you can feel actually like grounded and confident in the fact that you belong in the rooms that you're in now and also in the rooms that you want to be in.
I love that. I think that that's a perfect way to wrap up the episode. But thank you guys for tuning into the podcast. If you have any more questions, ideas for other episodes you want us to cover around these topics, I feel like we just talked about so much. This went way longer than we thought it was. We're all always like, this isn't going to be a big one. We'll talk for like 30 minutes and then we always yap about so much. So if there's any other episodes that you guys want us to do, like follow-up episodes for this, please leave them in Spotify and leave all your questions in Spotify because we always do monthly Q&A episodes at the end of every single month to answer all of your questions that you leave for us. But with that, thanks for tuning into the podcast and until next week.